When was the last time you shook hands with someone? A lot about the way we communicate has changed. The greeting for our new normal is eye contact. It signals that a person is present, engaged, and connected. It activates your social brain, your intentions, and your emotions. I want to offer you a perspective that can significantly change your life. What if I told you that eye contact may govern how successful you are? Take feedback I received after an interview. Your lack of eye contact made you seem unprepared and insecure. You aren't really a culture fit. The act of being seen is as important as being understood. Eye contact matters. But what's even more important is that eye contact means different things in different cultures. For some, eye contact is a sign of confidence and attentiveness. We assume that if someone looks away while we're talking to them, they're uninterested or looking for someone else to talk to. For others, too much eye contact would actually be considered aggressive and confrontational. Avoiding it is actually a sign of respect for bosses and elders. Psychologists claim it can impact your attention, emotion, and even how you evaluate someone as trustworthy or intelligent. Now, what happens in the brains of two people when they make eye contact in a virtual setting? Studies show that when people made real-time eye contact, they mimicked one another's blinks, and the same regions of their brains activated. When the video was delayed or not presented, the synchrony stopped. Human interaction has changed drastically due to the pandemic. We've added another layer that further disconnects us. We paused our normal work routines, and many of us were forced into isolation. Although technology has improved our virtual experience, we've encountered a magnified gap between bias and cultural competence. The lack of social cues or emotions makes electronic communication more challenging. Since social norms and standards disappear in virtual environments, this new normal can lead to unintended consequences. Our culture governs our communication styles, that in consequence govern how we are perceived. And in many ways, our communication styles may be working against us by creating a biased perception of who we are, whether it be how we make eye contact or how we present ourselves in a virtual setting. So, does something like unbroken eye contact and speaking up in a meeting determine who gets hired or promoted? Studies show that people in powerful positions usually reward styles similar to their own. Those who tend to be indirect when giving instructions are perceived as less confident. When work is accomplished in the privacy of a team, the outcome of the team's effort may be connected with the person who is most vocal about reporting results. So, take cultures who tend to communicate more indirectly and place value on status. Their communication style makes them reluctant to put themselves forward, and they risk not getting credit for their contributions. We make judgment calls on who gets promoted based on who is participating more, and as a result, who moves up in an organization is connected to how we perceive others. But that perception may be flawed. Whether someone speaks up or not may also be connected to their culture and may have nothing to do with them being insecure or less confident. At one point, I learned the hard way that in fact, any exchange of information can become the basis for judgments or misjudgments about competence. After a recent training, I received a negative evaluation, so I asked my supervisor for an explanation. He said that I knew less than my peers. I asked how he had reached that conclusion. He said, "You ask more questions." So asking more questions may be applauded in some cultures, but could play against you in others. When I started my career in the US, I naively believed that if I was always on time, never said no to a project, didn't contradict others, met all my deadlines, and gave my best effort, I would quickly move my way up the corporate ladder. I was wrong. I had a bigger problem. My indirect communication style was getting in the way. I felt that I might not be accepted if I shared an opinion that was contrary to what others believed, so I avoided voicing my ideas in group settings. I gave my power away to others by assuming that their viewpoints held more weight than my own. I allowed myself to speak only when I knew my comments would be met with approval. And I was constantly told to be more assertive and hold the line with your customers. This created constant pressure in my mind to be careful about what I said and how I said it, and I became overly vigilant about how my comments were received. So what happens when you put someone quiet with someone who is loud in a virtual meeting? The louder the other person gets, the more quiet the other one gets. Instead of mirroring the energy with our voice, we do the opposite. We join calls with colleagues from various countries, cultures, and time zones, and some want to occupy all of the meeting while others never really speak up. How much of that has to do with their culture? Growing up in a mostly indirect culture, I used to believe that agreeing was always better than disagreeing. I remember that thinking that saying yes to everything was my superpower. It quickly turned into my biggest enemy and led to burnouts, letdowns, and mental breakdowns. I overcommitted and always fell short. If I had to say no, I was taught to be nice about it, and sometimes my subtle no was misinterpreted for a yes. So naturally, until I understood how my indirect style was working against me, it led to professional and personal hardships. So it's fair to say that some cultures are more direct than others. But when speaking up counts for half the grade, there's a gap. Now, take your preference for power distribution. You get equally qualified people on a call, but one may be a manager and the other may be an individual contributor. People who place value on status will rarely disagree in front of a manager, so they're less likely to get noticed. CEOs often make decisions in 5 minutes about matters on which others may have worked 5 months. I recall hearing a CEO say, "If a person making the proposal seems confident, I approve. If not, I say no." This might seem like a reasonable approach. The CEO obviously thinks he knows what a confident person sounds like. But his judgment, which may be dead right for some people, may be dead wrong for others. And how much of this is accentuated in a virtual setting? Today, virtual collaboration might make up the single most important element in the modern working world. So, how do we manage the cultural differences that are inevitably present in the new normal? It starts with awareness. Each of us has his or her own distinct personality. On top of that are tendencies, assumptions, and reflexes handed down to us by the history of the communities we grew up in. And those differences are very specific. So of course our ability to succeed at what we do is powerfully connected to where we're from. Who we are cannot be separated from our culture. And when we ignore that fact, we fail. How others perceived my indirect communication style is proof of how misunderstanding can lead to bias and how, if left unexamined, can stop you from being successful. Awareness is just the beginning. Action needs to follow. So how can we actually bridge the gap from bias to cultural competence? So I ran a little experiment on myself and started being a little more direct. I began to say no more often, tried cutting my sentences in half, got to the point faster, and I realized it was okay to speak up in front of others and give them feedback more openly regardless of their position. My life changed forever. I began to get noticed in the workplace and realized that a small style switch did the trick. So how can you apply this to your life? Take a common scenario in which you're giving or receiving feedback. Think about how the person you're interacting with communicates and see if you can make a connection to their culture before making an assumption or judgment. If someone doesn't make direct eye contact or doesn't participate in meetings as much as you'd expect them to, maybe it doesn't mean they're uninterested or insecure, but culturally that they'd rather speak one-on-one instead of in a group setting. Be aware of different communication styles and avoid letting them influence your assessment of a person's contributions. And when you find yourself jumping to a conclusion, assume positive intent. People might be struggling to get into the conversation versus having nothing to contribute. And their communication style might be unconventional rather than ineffective. Our perceptions change our minds, and our minds change our reactions. So can our reactions change our outcomes? Absolutely. Becoming aware of my own communication style significantly changed mine. This tiny shift in my communication style stopped my brain from judging how I think and feel about myself and how I perceive others. Here's where it all came full circle. For the last 9 years, I struggled with feeling a void in my life. We'll call it a sense of belonging. Leaving my family in South America to start a life in the US was one of the hardest things I ever did, but mostly because I was stuck. not believing that I could do it or that I'd ever make it here. I remember being hired for my dream job and letting the recruiter know that I would be thrilled to accept the offer, but that I also needed help getting my U.S. permanent residence. The recruiter said, "Hold on, we weren't aware of this. I'm not sure we can do this for you. I'll call you back." Those 5 minutes were the longest I've ever waited. When I got the go-ahead, I thought to myself, wow, I can't believe it. I got so lucky. I really shouldn't be here. So for years and years into the whole process, I kept trying to overcompensate and overachieve. I thought the U.S. government would figure me out and find out that I wasn't worth the green card and that it would be denied and that I'd be deported. It wasn't until a few weeks ago that I finally got it in the mail, and on that day, everything just clicked in my head. 2 things happened. First, my feelings of doubt and insecurity disappeared. And second, I realized that none of my imposter syndrome had to do with where I'm from or what my cultural background is, but all to do with how my culture was impacting the way I communicate. So I stopped letting that get in the way of my success. Instead of using my differences as an excuse to why I'm so verbose and not as assertive as my American colleagues, I style switch when I have to. And guess what? It works. So I ask you to do 3 simple things that can dramatically change the outcomes in your life and in turn lead you to believe in yourself and in others. First, get to know yourself. How do you derive your identity? What is your preference for power distribution? How do you make decisions in ambiguous situations? How do you communicate, directly or indirectly? Do you prioritize tasks or relationships first? There are many cultural tools in the market, but I personally found GlobeSmart very helpful. Second, get to know others. And third, learn how to bridge your differences so you can build on your similarities. How we talk and listen are deeply influenced by cultural experience. Communication isn't as simple as saying what you mean. How you say what you mean is crucial, and it differs from one person to the next, because using language is learned social behavior. Although we might think that our ways of saying what we mean are natural, we can run into trouble if we interpret and evaluate others based on our assumptions. The trend towards a more intercultural work environment is speeding up in the context of the pandemic. So next time you find yourself in a cross-cultural or virtual team, try focusing on these 3 steps and incorporate them into your work routines. Pro tip: no matter where you're from or what culture you represent, how you view yourself is how you treat yourself. So inhale confidence, exhale doubt. You are what you give. So go share this information with someone who needs it the most. Gracias.